initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much for very insightful comments. I mean, I'm sure that there will be questions. We will have time after the two speeches for questions and comments from the audience. But before, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Supachai to talk about trade, competition, consumer policy.
Thank you very much, Frederick. And before I proceed, certainly would like to just echo what my good friend Pascal has just been saying about cuts and contributions of cuts to the multilateral trading system. Not in a way that we can easily see clearly ahead of us in terms of, let's say, negotiations or market access opening up, but in terms of letting the results of our work at the World Trade Organization in terms of opening up markets, setting up good rules, that those rules and market openings could be used in a fair manner, in a way that we can guarantee the results of the process of freeing up trade, so that consumers would really have the choices. They would have the quality, the standard of the products, and would certainly guarantee the way that they are not going to be abused. And of course, the market powers will not be abused, because by liberalizing the market powers, you certainly cannot really have a prejudgment as what sort of results finally would be produced. So we at the UN, at UNCTAD, greatly appreciate this work that Prateep and his team at CUTS have been contributing, and the work that we've been doing together in the areas of competition, consumer protection policies, investment agreements. All these are areas in which we are trying to move so that we can support trade liberalization in a way capacity can be built, and also the kind of fairness could be guaranteed for the consumers at large. CUT is celebrating its 30th anniversary. Next year, UNCTAD will be celebrating our 50th anniversary. It's a long time for UNCTAD to be around, 50 years, and in the last 8 years on my watch, we've always been working very closely with CUT, and surprisingly to see that in certainly 3 of the 4 areas of the so-called Singapore issues that has been intensively debated before it was decided to pick one up, the 3 of the 4 areas have been covered by the activities at UNCTAD. And actually, under my watch, I would like to see that, hope that it result in more intensive work in these 3 areas. You might be surprised how so. But if you look at the areas of investment, competition, and trade facilitation, we have fairly well covered all these 3 areas, mostly jointly with the WTO, particularly in terms of our negotiation, in terms of negotiations with the WTO that we have been advising, supporting. But to see the evolution of the thought processes in the last 30 years is something which is, I think, a lesson to be learned. Now, 30 years ago in the 1990s, you would probably recall that in those days, we were witnessing a series of mega deals, mega mergers in the areas of Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, General Electric, Honeywell, and also Microsoft. And in those days, we were concerned because competition agencies around the world had difficulty. Those that existed in those days were having different interpretation of how to deal with these mega mergers. At the same time, in those days, we were seeing Europe move into a sort of a single market entity. And the one I would say combining theme of that single market single market entity is the existence of the theme on competition, on competition and competition rules. So a lot of people around the GATT and WTO in those days were thinking that if some of these rules on competition and competition policies could have some implications, particularly if some implications on market access, that sometimes market access could be impacted because there might be dominant powers in the market that could move the market around. There could be some powers that would limit participation in the market or single out parts of the market to be passed around for different companies or group of companies to be predominating over those market size. So quite a number of people were thinking, I think justifiably along that line, whether when you have trade liberalization, more market access, whether we would need flanking measures along the line of protection of consumer interests and at the same time to make sure that the gains that we have reaped through liberalization will not be negated because people go over into the anti-competitive policies area. And of course, some of us were thinking by looking at the practices of the GATT and WTO in different areas that there were already some implications coming out of the way the WTO functions. If you look at the so-called anti-dumping, the trade remedial policy. Now, anti-dumping is about how to counter the kind of unfair practices that would have the sort of below cost prices that would actually distort the market and help to corner the market in one ways and try to exploit the market later on. And so this kind of predatory practices have already been recognized in the way anti-dumping practices have been put into implementation. If you look at the TRIPS agreement actually allows a kind of the patent obligations that could be validated by governments, giving actually some sort of an anti-competitive practices. Yes, because it gives something like proprietorship to only those who have actually owned the IP. But of course, with a kind of fervent wish that this will lead to more innovation and more benefits for investment and trade in the future. So it's already there, the sense of having this IP and also some of the anti-competitive practices. This actually restrict contestability in the market. But of course, with this kind of logic that those restrictions could promote larger degree of innovation. We have seen in the GATT agreement, Article 8, that there is a sort of provision that talks about, if I recall, that the supplier should not resort to monopolistic policies to limit the entry of or to violate the national treatment, something like that, in the GATT agreement already exists. So that was something like 30 years ago, and there were those proponents of including competition into the way we should be working with negotiations for more market access and for rules making exercise. Now, on the other hand, there was also legitimacy in the way that some of us have been thinking and saying, look, I mean, of course, we might need competition policy, but won't this kind of policy restrict us in the way that we would have the need to have policy space to adopt certain, again, anti-competitive policies, for example, in the areas of infant industry agreement or in the areas of industrial policy that is now making a return at the moment. But in those days, in the 1990s, a lot of countries in Asia, for example, the new tigers and the young tigers, they were all using industrial policies with a little bit of the anti-competitive policies in the background to promote some of this policy space. There were others who were saying in those days, I recall, that you cannot work on this one-size-fits-all kind of an agreement. If you look at investment, for example, you cannot have a uniform investment agreements, and the effort of you have seen that the OECD, the multilateral agreement on investment, the MAI, has been actually shut down. And so, I mean, you cannot think of doing this with competition because countries have different backgrounds, different sizes of company in different countries. in some countries, one huge company may not actually imply this dominant power, but in some other economies, smaller, just smaller size, and those companies, they can imply certain dominant power as well. So there were legitimate objections to the one-size-fits-all kind of agreement, and that would not actually be something that we all can accept as a general rules here. And of course, there were some economists who were saying in those days that you shouldn't spend too much time on this kind of rule-making exercise. There are much more urgent policies to be carried out in terms of doing marketing reform. Particularly in those days, markets reform would prescribe the way that government will have to be able to segregate themselves, because pre-1990s, governments have been so much involved in all kind of exercises that have become so much a sort of interventionist policy making. So in those days, economists were saying, look, I mean, you don't need to go all the way to be looking at bid rigging or cartel, whatever kind of conducive actions, but just look at the way governments are driving policies forward. So there has been all sorts of arguments in favor and against taking up competition rules at the multilateral level. But if you now looked at the way the thought process, as Frederick has been always saying, the way that there's now a proliferation of the way competition rules are being adopted throughout the world. In the 1990s, there were less than 50 countries that know about setting up the competition rules. Less than 50 countries. And during our negotiations in the first WTO meeting in Singapore in, I think, 1995, there were countries that just rejected outright because they didn't know anything about it, and so why should we be bothering ourselves by adopting all these agreements on competition rules? And lo and behold, now in last year, 2012, I just checked the figure before I came here, there were in last year 122 countries having this competition rules in use. Well, in use meaning, I have to be frank about it, there's quite a number of countries that have rules, but never know how to implement it. This is another problem that we would have to sort out in the future. But this is a change and an evolution of thought processes that I would like us all to understand and to appreciate how CUTS has been working, and how UNCTAD has been working with CUTS to maintain the interest in some of the areas that could not have been subject to some of the intricate negotiations, protracted negotiations, leading to so many rulemaking that would be just prescribing one size fits all. That would not probably fly. But anyway, that there would be ways that we could apply some of these rules elsewhere, having people looking at the principles and joining hands from time to time, as we do nearly every year with our intergovernmental expert group, looking on the way we harmonize competition rules and consumer welfare protection policies and things like that. So I wouldn't say that we should pat our own backs and congratulate us, CUT and UNCTAD, that we've seen to it that from 50 to 122 is quite a record. But anyway, this is still growing. The list is still growing, and we're still having countries that have come to see us to talk about how to set up those rules and regulations. And it's also very pleasing to see that countries in transition, particularly countries in transitions that, of course, in the old days that was preceding the convergence of the system. Now that countries in transitions have emerged as market-oriented economies, they are finding much more to their benefits to be having the market, the liberal market system, but at the same time to be accompanying this market liberalization processes with some form of competition authorities. And just today and this afternoon, and I think Frederick, you're going to chair the session on the policy review that we have conducted for Ukraine. And you'll be surprised to see that Ukraine has already had a long time, I think this was more than 20 years that they have had, but to practice it now, they are now modernizing, revising with us, with our recommendations, and to see that the powers that are invested into their competition authorities are quite significant. much stronger than I have seen in other areas, in areas of economics that are more liberal, more market-oriented than is these economies. And many of these countries in transition are just really looking forward to dealing with their own economy, which is infested with a sizable, what they call shadow economy. In some of the economy in transition, shadow economy is more than 50%. So this is the way that things have evolved, and if I just take a couple more minutes to point out some of the facts that as we are working on this sort of issue, we are seeing the rise of the transnational corporations. The rise of the transnational corporation, and now that we are talking also about global value chain, 90% of the total trade that TNCs are involved in terms of linking in international network of production, this 80% of the global trading volume are trade involved with the GVC operationalized by the TNCs. And the TNCs, they all do this by making investment, setting up shops here and there, and everybody. This is a part of the chain that we are seeing. But at the same time, by making this investment and having sizable TNC participating in the international trade, countries around the world are seeing, look, here we are seeing some forms of maybe anti-competitive infringement because of the size of the TNCs and the way they sometimes group together to work in some markets. Sometimes they group together to limit the buying power, to make smaller economies be more dependent on limited group of buyers so that they can control the market. Sometimes they use the powers to limit the competition from the domestic companies. We've seen in Africa in the last 10, 20 years the process of deindustrialization. And of course, some of us think that it's because of the invasion of the foreign investors, the sizable investors, or whatever. But people are seeing that there is a crowding out effect of some of the domestic investment because of the foreign investment. So there are all kinds of concerns, and if you look at the way the poor will be affected, SMEs are not always granted easy access because the access is always controlled by the proprietor of the chain. You would see that the way the poor are not always afforded the best prices because some collusive efforts cartel effort results in unjustifiably high prices being charged for some of the essential products. If you go for food or pharmaceutical product, medicines, and all these essential products, you would question sometimes why the price is so high. And it's not because of the fundamental change in supply and demand all the time. So that would be practices that would seem to be emerging that we need to take care of, that not by just more market access negotiations alone, but we need to take care that the rules-making exercise that probably will be the future of the way we look at multilateral trading system, that we strengthen all these rules. But we have to strengthen all these rules with the understanding that we're not bringing back some of the regulations. So these are some of the things that come to my mind and some of the words that I would like to leave with you. The first thing is that when you look at the need to promote competition, and when you have the rules and regulations that are being set up, there are competition rules and there are economic rules, economic regulations, because economic policy making, access to market, and how licenses are granted, they're not always left in the hand of competition policies. Governments always have to step in. They would have to have their own economic management policies. And so most of the time, in order to be looking at, let's say, countries are now very worried about this ecological changes. So many times you would see government stepping into different areas like investment policies, economic policies in general. Governments become assertive because to be able to evoke green economy things, they would have to put in more rules and regulations. And whether these rules and regulations would be competitively implemented, or they would limit competition, most of the time they have restrictive kind of effects on competition. So here we have to be able to take care that while we are becoming more enthusiastic about looking at the rules and regulations to maintain the health care, the food safetiness and all this other thing, we have to make sure that they are not really provoking the kind of anti-competitive policies at the same time. So there must be some balance between economic regulation, enabling state, as we call it, UNCTAD, and also the need to enhance competition. The second area which we are seeing very frequently these days is the so-called sector policies are emerging. Sector policies on electricity, on water, on IT, on transportation, on carbon dioxide emission, all these other things, there will be sector policies. And all these sector policies will be regulatory bodies for all the sectors policy. In energy, you have regulatory body on energy. When you privatize energy, you have the independent energy producers and things like that. So at the same time, you have the sector policies, sectoral regulatory bodies, and at the same time, you have these national competition policies. And they are not always in agreement, because jurisdictions of the sector policies, sectors jurisdictions, and also competition jurisdictions, they're not always, you know, in harmony. So in many cases, you see a lot of conflicts in some countries. In some countries, for example, banking is very simple. Central bank is a sector policy. They control the number of banks, the policies, interest rate. But do they always look at the way the bank's clients, the consumers of the banking services, are they well protected? Not always. Sometimes they're in the hands of the competition policies, and they don't always have the same policies as to how banking competition could be enhanced. Just one yes, okay. Then last point. One last point. We are seeing more and more the kind of cross-border anti-competitive actions. A lot of cross-border mergers and acquisitions, and I've already alluded to the fact that the TNCs have been gaining in terms of their size and activities around the world. So there is greater need for national competition policies to be working together. But this is not always the case, because national competition committee, they have their rules and regulations, particularly the confidentiality of their information. So it's always a question whether we can really have kind of harmonization. So UNCTAD has been working to try to